We take you live to the New York Stock Exchange, where the final bell is just ringing, and on a history-making day in the New York Stock Exchange, really, our Rob McEwen is there.
And with a moment of silence for the troops in the Gulf ended, as you heard, with a cheer. The applause this morning was for the men and women of the military. This afternoon it was probably for the traders and investors themselves. It was quite a day on Wall Street. I'm going to have to look at the board right now to tell you how it ended. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended at 2621.53, up 112.62 on 314,627,000 shares. The big story was oil. It declined, and dramatically so, at one point so quickly that it tripped the automatic shutdown at the New York Mercantile Exchange. That happens when the price goes up or down by $7.50 a barrel. And trading was resumed an hour later. Oil closed at $21.30 a barrel, down a whopping $10.70 a barrel for the February crude contracts. That's the largest one-day decline in history. And that traditional safe haven in uncertain times, gold, was down in a whopping way as well, down $30.10 an ounce, closing at $374.40. Internationally, in other markets, the story was much the same. Stocks up, gold and oil down. So for now, the traders and investors here go home to watch the events in the Gulf develop and unfold later this evening, and to wonder, I suppose, what they will mean for them tomorrow.
Rob McEwen at the New York Stock Exchange, which had the third biggest single-day increase in the history of the exchange. We're checking that. That's our belief. Other headlines as the war in the Gulf unfolds. President Bush has met with his cabinet. He calls for Iraq to surrender. Allied troops begin to move and maneuver closer to the Kuwaiti border. Saddam Hussein says his ground forces will not be defeated, points out that they are dug in deeply and prepared to fight, as the Iraqis put it, quote, to the last child. France's military chief says Iraqi Air Force has been crippled, perhaps 50% destroyed. U.S. warplanes and missiles blast Baghdad in more than 1,200 sorties. The Exxon Corporation cuts crude oil prices. That's the wholesale price. President Bush is holding his first cabinet meeting since ordering Operation Desert Storm to begin. Mr. Bush had some words for Iraq.
I want to get caught up in some semantics about all of this. It's got to get out of Kuwait. And it's got to do it with no concessions or no condition.
As Allied warplanes continued their round-the-clock pounding of Iraq, the battleship Wisconsin in the Gulf, under the command of Captain Bill, joined in the attack again with another wave of cruise missile launches, the cruise missiles known as Tomahawks. Well over 100 Tomahawks have been sent off so far. It's believed the United States has about 500 of these cruise missiles on hand. This is how a cruise missile looks when it's launched in the dark and at night. Fireball goes to Iraq, possibly into Kuwait. The cost of those missiles, about $1 million each. As the general pointed out a moment ago, that the Iraqis now claim to have downed 55 Allied aircraft. The Allies say that they have lost only 3 planes. One American, that was an F-18 Hornet, and the Navy pilot is believed to have been killed. One British plane, a Tornado, downed. 2 crew members are said to have bailed out, their fate unknown. And then one Allied aircraft piloted by a Kuwaiti was shot down in Kuwait, and the pilot believed killed. But among our analysts, there is a belief that the Iraqis may very well have downed some of those Tomahawk missiles and are counting them in their numbers of aircraft downed, and that may be one reason that they say 55 have been shot down. There's also a strong belief that they may be inflating the figures for propaganda purposes. The chief French military officer says half of Iraq's warplanes have actually been destroyed, and that the other half, in his opinion, probably have been put out of action for the duration of the war. Stock prices are way up, oil prices way down. Exxon announcing a nickel a gallon cut in the wholesale prices. Let's check in with Tom Fenton in Israel on the phone. Tom, again, the Iraqis are threatening to strike Israel. They say they haven't fired their best shot yet, and they will yet reach Israel with some kind of weaponry.
That's right. The Army tonight warned the Israelis again that there is the possibility that several mobile missiles or missile launchers are still available to the Iraqis, and that missiles could be fired at Israel at any time Tel Aviv itself is a ghost town tonight. It's eerie. I've never seen it like this except on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the one day of the year when everyone stays indoors. Now they're staying indoor by government order. There's a state of emergency, and only people who are involved in essential services are supposed to be out on the streets. Everyone else is carrying a gas mask and sitting around listening to the news. I have to say, though, that the mood is a lot lighter than it was last night or early this morning. People here feel that the worst is over, and they're absolutely delighted at the job the United States Air Force has done. Even the Israeli Air Force, and they're a cocky lot and consider themselves the hottest pilots in the business, say hats off that the Americans are now the world's champions. Dan?
Tom Fenton reporting live from Israel by telephone. The sense grows inside Saudi Arabia, just a sense. There's no official indication of this anywhere. The sense grows that the Allies may be preparing to launch their ground offensive much earlier than was anticipated based on the apparent success of the air attacks. So I think it's important to keep in mind as our coverage unfolds here this afternoon, we try to follow the progress of the war, that there has been a sense that this could take perhaps a long time. There have been the cautionary statements from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Military Joint Chiefs. But a thing to look for, what are those U.S. and other allied ground forces doing now, moving up closer to the Kuwaiti border and maneuvering so close to the Kuwaiti border? There is a sense that the schedule for the ground offensive could be in the process of being compressed and moved up very quickly. We're keeping an eye on that for you with our correspondents in the area, including one of the most experienced combat correspondents in the world, our Bob Simon. The United States Congress is preparing to express its support for U.S. troops in the Persian Gulf, but as so often happens, there is some division along party lines as to exactly how the resolution on troop support should read. We're going to talk about that resolution now with House Republican Leader Robert Michael and Democrat Tom Foley, the House Speaker. Thank you very much for being with us. First, Mr. Speaker, you met with the President today. What can you tell us about his mood, his determination, and where you think things go from here?
Senator Mitchell, the Senate Democratic leader who was with me, and I and the other leaders in the Congress, Mr. Gephardt and Mr. Michael and Senator Dole, met with the President this morning for about an hour, and he and Secretary Cheney went over the military operations as they've taken place so far. I think we all felt great relief that they had gone so well and that there has been a minimum loss of life, one tragic death apparently. As we move forward, I think there is a concern that the administration has that there will be a sense that all may continue on this extraordinarily low level of casualty. We're very thankful for this first day of operations that has been so successful that the loss of life, not only military but collateral civilian loss of life, has been so low. But one cannot know what the future holds.
Thank you, Speaker Foley. And we said that Robert Michael was with you. Well, we hope to talk to him a little later in the afternoon. We're delighted to talk to Senator Mitchell now, the leader of the Senate. Senator Mitchell, you voted against the resolution authorizing President Bush to do what he has done. In retrospect, would you change your vote?
I'm sorry, Dan. I'm getting an interrupting audio sound from someone else. Could you repeat the question, please?
Be happy to, Senator. That sometimes happens with live coverage, as you know, in journalism as in politics. Many things are unpredictable. The question was, in retrospect, would you change your vote on the original resolution authorizing President Bush to do what he has now apparently so successfully done?
No, I would not, Dan. I believe then and believe now that the policy I advocated was the correct one. I believe that the objective of removing Iraq from Kuwait could have been achieved short of war by economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure. But now the Congress has voted and by majority authorized the President to take this decision. The President has acted, made the decision, and hostilities are underway. And therefore I believe that we should unite in expressing our unanimous and unequivocal support for the men and women of our armed forces who have already displayed enormous skill and courage.
Senator Mitchell, in talking with the President today, did you get the sense that the ground offensive part of this war may be very near or is still some distance away?
There was no indication of that, Dan. The meeting was primarily a briefing by Secretary Cheney, similar to the public briefing he had given earlier, but with some more detail. neither he nor the president indicated anything that would lead one to conclude one way or the other with respect to the ground offensive.
Speaker Foley, what are you hearing from your constituents? I know that you represent a district in eastern Washington state. What are you hearing from the people back home?
Well, there are some people who are still very deeply opposed to the U.S. Involvement in war. I think the overwhelming majority, however, would express the view that that debate, which the Congress undertook last week, was concluded. The vote was taken. It decided to give the president authority. He's exercised it. And now we all stand behind the troops in the field. I think even those who oppose the war have a great sympathy and support for the troops in the field, in the hope that this can be a short, decisive war with the minimum loss of life.
Speaker Foley, in your judgment, how long will this fighting go on?
I have no way of knowing. Today's events were unexpectedly good from the standpoint of both the success of the operations and the relatively low loss of life. But one doesn't know what the future holds. General Eisenhower once said that it's like entering a dark room. You open the door, you don't know what will be there, how long this will last, how many casualties. No one has a way of knowing. We can only hope that it's short and that the casualties are minimal.
Well, Senator Mitchell, with that in mind, as you look ahead, what do you think ought to be the major questions that rank-and-file Americans consider about the possible long-range consequences of what's happening?
Well, I think clearly the long-range consequence of the defeat of Iraq, and I have said for many months that I believe that if war occurs, the outcome is not in doubt, that the United States will prevail, and I believe Iraq will be defeated and will withdraw from Kuwait, as I believe they should and must, will be how to maintain peace and stability in the region, which is one of the president's often stated objectives. A defeat which induced Syria and Iran and others to move toward filling a vacuum in Iraq might not be desirable from our standpoint. We have the problem of Hafez al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, whose record is not unlike that of Saddam Hussein's. So I think it's going to be to maintain an international interest in peace and stability and security in the region. And I think it's very important that that effort not be just an American effort. This must again be as international as it possibly can be.
Senator Mitchell, aren't we now stuck, or are we now stuck with being, whether we like it or not, the policeman for the whole Middle East region? And that's going to be a very dangerous line of work.
It will indeed if we succumb to that temptation, as I hope we will not. It's important to note, Dan, that the United States has maintained a military force of some kind in the Middle East for nearly a half century, but it has primarily been naval and related naval air force. I think it would be a serious mistake for the United States to maintain a large permanent ground force on the Arabian Peninsula or anywhere else in the Middle East. I don't believe that's the president's intention, and I hope very much that as soon as possible we can return to the status that existed prior to this crisis with respect to the presence and composition of our armed forces.
Speaker Foley, we have only a few seconds left, but do you think that we're going to be in strong military numbers around the Middle East for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think there will be a need for some peacekeeping force after the war is over, and I would agree with Senator Mitchell that the other countries of the world, that those that are with us in this effort and others, should take a major role in not only the personnel but the cost of such a peacekeeping effort. I would not want to see the United States maintain the same proportionate size as we are now.
Thank you very much. The two most powerful Democrats in Washington, for that matter in the country, Speaker Foley and Senator Mitchell. We do hope to have the Republican Minority Leader, Congressman Michael, with us a little later on as our continuing coverage of the war goes on this CBS station. Right now we're going to go Richard Threlkeld in London. He has a report on another speech by the new British Prime Minister, John Major. Richard?
Good evening, Dan. Just a few moments ago, Prime Minister Major gave a brief speech on television to the British people, which sounded a great deal like George Bush's speech to the American people last night. Basically a rationale for why are the British now at war in Iraq. Because he said the Britons can't reward aggression. You can't reward a bully. If you do, you'll pay for it dearly, and you may pay for it later. And he tried to answer a question I think probably a lot of British people are asking tonight. Why are we at war in Iraq now?
Tonight, I want to explain to you why they are there and what this conflict is about. Our troops are part of an international force. It is drawn from many countries. It is acting under the authority of the United Nations, and its purpose is to end Saddam Hussein's ruthless occupation of Kuwait.
And he went on to say that the reason that we are now at war is because we can't afford to delay. If we had done so, would severely endanger British troops and American troops for that matter. He also, as George Bush indicated last night, had three objectives, namely to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait, to restore the legitimate Kuwait government, and most important perhaps to restore and uphold the authority of the United Nations. And Prime Minister Major promised the British people to work very hard for a strategic security settlement of all the Middle East after the war, and as George Bush promised the Americans, to bring the troops home as soon as he possibly can, Dan.
Richard Threlkeld in London. As part of our continuing CBS News coverage, roughly about every quarter hour, we like to bring you up on the latest headlines. For this quarter hour, these are the late developments. President Bush meets with his cabinet. More Allied raids on Baghdad. Iraq says it has hit scores of planes, claims to have downed 55. The French say the Iraqi Air Force has at least been cut in half. President Bush is meeting with his cabinet right now. The White House is calling on Saddam Hussein to surrender. Saddam Hussein, in a speech, we'll tell you more about this later, has said he's not about to surrender. Here's some of what President Bush had to say. Well, basically what the president is saying is that this attack is going to be unrelenting until and unless Saddam Hussein gets out of Kuwait. The Bush administration says there will, quote, be no pause for peace as still more attacks roll over Iraq and Iraqi forces in Kuwait. The United States is using again the Tomahawk cruise missiles. Over 100 of these missiles have been fired so far, with shots such as this from warships in the Persian Gulf. And fired from the warship, takes off, rides that fire into Iraq and into Kuwait. Allied ground forces are known to be moving closer to the Kuwaiti border. An Iraqi diplomat has vowed to use chemical weapons again if those ground forces actually enter Kuwait. There is a sense, no solid facts to support it other than the fact that U.S. troops have moved closer to the Kuwaiti border, a sense that whatever ground offensive is being planned by the U.S.-led allies, that the schedule for it may be moving up much faster now that the air attacks are proving so successful. That's one of the storylines we're watching to see how it develops as these hours go by. Is a ground offensive near? Is it much nearer than anybody had anticipated? We don't know. We are trying to find out. We've said before, we say again, there's much more that we don't know than we do know about what's happening in the whole theater of the war. French officials emphasize that they do believe that Iraq's chemical warfare capability has, for all practical purposes, been destroyed in early attacks. No one rules out the possibility that the Iraqis could still mount some kind of chemical attack, but the back of that, the spine of it, appears to have been effectively broken. The French say they believe that at least half the Iraqi Air Force has been eliminated. Now, the Baghdad radio says Iraq continues to bring down Allied jets, the total now 55. Our military analysts say the Iraqis could be claiming as planes down some of those cruise missiles. In other words, they could knock out some of the Tomahawk missiles and believe, or at least put them in their count of planes down. The Allies officially acknowledged the downing of only 3 aircraft, 1 American, an F-18 Hornet with a Navy pilot, one piloted by a Kuwaiti who was attacking Iraqi forces in Kuwait, and the third being a British aircraft, 2 men in it. Nobody knows what happened to the 2 crewmen in that Tornado jet. One report said that they parachuted out. An effort is being made to find them on the ground. Here in New York, stocks soared on news from the Gulf and oil prices fell. Now, Jacqueline Adams reports on security against terrorists around the country.
Saddam Hussein vowed that if war came, he'd open a second front in the United States in the form of widespread terrorist attacks. In Washington, federal security officials took no chances, closing some building entrances and screening incoming bureaucrats.
But I'm just glad they are taking the proper security precautions that we need to take, because I don't want to have my life in danger just coming to work.
With 25 to 30-minute waits, though, not everyone at the Energy Department was satisfied with the precautions.
It doesn't make much sense to protect the building from a terrorist threat and leave the entire staff out on Independence Avenue as a soft target.
In San Antonio, as elsewhere around the country, Airport security has been significantly tightened. Magnetometers are now set at higher levels. Batteries must be removed from electronic devices. Only ticketed passengers are now allowed in sterile areas, and unattended cars are no longer allowed within 100 feet of airport terminals.
Any cars left unattended within 100 feet of the terminals will be searched, and we may even have to tow them away.
For all their concern, though, Transportation Department officials say so far they've seen no credible terrorist threats. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, New York.
In Baghdad, Saddam Hussein is again talking tough. Saddam Hussein has declared defiantly in yet another radio broadcast that Iraq would defeat what he calls the Satan in the White House. Says Saddam Hussein, and I quote now, "Success is assured." He also went on to say, and this is a quote from Saddam Hussein, the latest we have, that if President Bush is, quote, hoping that Iraq will yield to you after the airstrikes, and if you, Mr. Bush, believe that the ground forces can be neutralized, then you are, says Saddam Hussein, deluding yourself. You will find that the Air Force on which you base your explanation of the lightning war will not be alone in the battle. Quote, unquote, the latest from Saddam Hussein. Mikhail Gorbachev is talking again in the Soviet Union, and for coverage of that, my colleague Mike Wallace. Mike, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dan. As you said, Mikhail Gorbachev today said that he had received just 1 hour's notice of plans to bomb Iraq, and he asked President Bush to give Saddam Hussein one last chance to promise a withdrawal from Kuwait. Gorbachev said after hearing the plans that he ordered the Soviet ambassador to Baghdad to contact the Iraqi leader with a last-minute appeal for withdrawal. The Soviet official later said that the message did not reach Saddam in time. In a 5-minute speech delivered about 10 hours after the start of war, Gorbachev said that all of the approximately 130 Soviet officials and workers left in Iraq were now safe. Incidentally, troops in the southern Soviet Union, an area with a large Muslim population, were placed on high alert at the outbreak of hostilities. The Executive Presidium of the Soviet Parliament was called into special session this morning to discuss the conflict. General Mikhail Moiseyev, chief of the Soviet military staff, he's the Soviet counterpart of Colin Powell, told the official TASS news agency that the outbreak of war was a tragedy for the people of Iraq and the entire Arab East. And, as you know, Mikhail Moiseyev have troubles of their own up in the rebellious Baltic states.
And what a different situation it would be if we were back in the, until recently, old Cold War era. Thanks, Mike. Our CBS News coverage of war in the Gulf, including our keeping an eye on the possibility of a ground offensive, continues. Back at CBS News war coverage headquarters in New York. With us now is Neil Livingston, an expert on terrorism. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Livingston. Where and how are we most likely to see any acts of terrorism?
Well, Dan, we're very thankful that we haven't seen any to date. There were many of us that felt that with the onset of war in the Middle East, that we would perhaps see attacks in Europe and the Middle East, and possibly even here in the United States. But that said, we are concerned that as Saddam Hussein is neutralized on the battlefield and all of those weapons are taken away from him, that he may indeed attempt to open that second front that your reporter talked about with attacks on civil aviation or on our embassies or on personnel in this country or even symbolic targets.
Make of the reports today that there have been scattered acts of terrorism around the world. As CBS News correspondent Bernard Goldberg was remarking earlier, we don't know that those are directly connected to the Iraqis. There's a lot of anti-Americanism out there, and it may just simply be a manifestation of that. What do you think?
Well, you know, Dan, I think that many people felt that there would be at least 6 or 7 U.S. embassies possibly sacked, given the emotionalism that would accompany any war, and that there would be what we call spontaneous terrorist attacks on everything from recruiting stations to any vestige of the United States. And again, we're very relieved in those few things that we've seen, which range from Latin America, at least reports on some problems in Latin America, to problems in Western Europe have been very, very minor, and we're very thankful about that right now.
We're talking to Neil Livingston, who is president of the Institute on Terrorism and Substantial Conflict. Mr. Livingston, if you had to point to one area of the world where you think the threat of terrorism is likely to increase the most fastest, where would that be?
Well, it would be in the Middle East or Western Europe. We thought that there would be a high probability of attacks against infrastructure targets, for example, in Saudi Arabia, almost sabotage-type attacks, as well as perhaps attacks against the leadership of all of those yet. But at the same time, we know that the terrorist groups, which today are based in Baghdad, and there are 5 infrastructure and support in Western Europe, and we're deeply concerned right now that they've had plenty of time to prepare for terrorist attacks, and that those attacks may indeed come, first of all, in Western Europe.
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Do you think the threat of terrorism will increase or decrease as time goes along?
Well, that's very hard to say. You've been cautioning your viewers all along to not make any dire predictions or premature predictions, and I guess I would have to say that we still feel that there will be some terrorism that flows out of this conflict. If Saddam Hussein is defeated quickly, I think that will minimize the chances of terrorism. But on the other hand, if he continues to fight back for a long period of time, I think that not only will he try to open this so-called second front, this terrorism front, but I think that that will stimulate many perhaps adherents of Saddam Hussein in Western Europe, possibly even in North America, to do their part, to carry out terrorist attacks to show their support of their beleaguered idol in Baghdad. So again, the sooner this gets over, the better. But I also think it's going to create a climate of hostility over the throughout that part of the world that is going to lead to terrorist attacks in the future for many years to come.
Well, Mr. Livingston, if you had to point to one area in the United States itself, which is perhaps most vulnerable to terrorism, where would that be?
Well, Dan, I would have to say it would be media centers in this country, because we don't think he's got much going here. And as a consequence, he's going to want to get the biggest bang for his buck. And that probably means some kind of attack in New York or Washington or Los Angeles, possibly Chicago. And they're probably going to pick a soft target here, because we do have enhanced security everywhere. And these guys are, by and large, notorious cowards. They don't want to take on a federal military installation or something that's very well defended. So we would probably see an attack on civilians or on innocent people in an airport, or just on the street, or even an attack against a national symbol in this country that would be sure to get publicity worldwide and would indicate, at least from Saddam Hussein's perspective, that I can hit you at home.
When we speak of terrorism, there's so many aspects to it. Are you surprised that Saddam Hussein's allies have not already struck in a much greater way with some form of terrorism?
I am surprised, Dan, and I'm also relieved, because and I was one of those, quite frankly, who predicted that with the onset of hostilities in the Middle East, that we would probably see the second front open up immediately, and that we might even see the grounding of American civil aviation in Western Europe, just as we've seen American planes pulled out of the Middle East.
What's your best estimate on why it hasn't happened? I was among those who, after talking to Saddam Hussein, was absolutely convinced that the second war started, you'd find a lot of terrorism.
Well, Dan, I've watched this guy ever since he came to power in 1979, and I suppose if there's anything you can say about Saddam Hussein, that in some ways he's very predictable, and in other ways he's very unpredictable, and he may be choosing his own time and place. But maybe there is also another view that you can put forward, and that is that these various terrorist allies, Abu Nidal, Abu Abbas, and so on, that they are shocked by the punishment that's been inflicted on Saddam Hussein and his inability to react, and that very much like the early days of the 1967 war, that they're going to lay back right now and see which way this thing goes for a while, rather than hitching their star and their fortunes right now to a guy that's going to go down.
Thank you very much, Neil Livingston, with the Institute on Terrorism. CBS News coverage of war in the Gulf continues. storylines of the hour. Air attacks on a very large scale continue inside Iraq and in Kuwait. The possibility of a ground offensive rises by the hour. The question is when. Among the other headlines, President Bush calls for unconditional pullout from Kuwait by the Iraqis. Baghdad radio now claims 55 Allied warplanes shot down. The Allies acknowledge only 3, 1 U.S., 1 Kuwaiti, 1 British. A Canadian reporter says Iraqi Defense Ministry is now, quote, a pile of rubble. That's the Iraqi Defense Ministry right along the Tigris River in downtown Baghdad. Allied ground forces are moving closer to the jump-off point for Kuwait. The possibility of a ground offensive much sooner than anyone anticipated is there. However, there is no official indication that a ground offensive is near. It's one of the things we're trying to watch very carefully. Stock prices up more than 110 points. The rocket climb on Wall Street, fueled, of course, by the Gulf news. The jump in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, now we're told the second biggest on record. Earlier in the day we were told it was the third biggest on record. As the bell sounded, you heard there, and the day ended, turns out to be the second biggest single-day jump in the Dow Jones Industrial Average ever. President Bush convened his first cabinet meeting since the war began. The president said that it's time to dispense with semantics, as he put it. He said only an unconditional Iraqi pullout from Kuwait could end the hostilities. He promised they'd be unrelenting until that happens. The president said there would be no Allied concessions. Warplanes of several nations are taking off from Saudi bases again, continuing their round-the-clock attacks inside Iraq. The rumble in the sky has not been reduced. Taking part of British Air Force Tornadoes and their pilots, one of the Tornadoes has been lost in fighting. A British pilot talked about that, the experience in combat.
Run like hell, and we just cleared to the west. And in the distance, you see other attacks going off.
That, he says, is what it's like up there. Massive confusion and chaos, but everything seeming to work. One British Tornado down. The 2 pilots of it are said to have bailed out, their fate unknown. The air attacks are continuing with wave after wave of Tomahawk missiles. This is in addition to the warplanes. The Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles fired from U.S. Navy ships in the Persian Gulf. If any are being fired now from U.S. ships in the Red Sea, we're not aware of it, but that could be happening. The Tomahawks reportedly are having a devastating impact on Iraqi defenses. Joining us now on the telephone is President Özal of Turkey. Turkey's parliament has voted to allow the Allies now limited use of Turkish bases for this offensive. That's a personal victory for the Turkish president, and we're delighted to have you with us, Mr. President. Why has it been so difficult to get the approval of your parliament for even limited use of those air bases?
My country has a different kind of system, democratic system, and we had almost 3 different approval of the parliament, and the last one gave us the possibility of using the air bases.
Well, now that you have gotten out of the parliament at least part of what you asked, how soon will airstrikes from Turkish bases be launched against Iran?
It is not up to us, it's up to the United States.
Do I understand you correctly that now...
Yes, the United States, if they want to use the bases for that purpose, they will be able to use it.
Your personal opinion, Mr. President, how much of a difference will airstrikes launched from Turkey make in this war?
I don't know, because the number of planes, as far as I understand, is very much crowded in the Arabia, and the number of planes, which I know from our bases, will be around something like 96 or 100, and but this area is close to the northern Iraq, closer than Arabian bases.
Mr. President, we appreciate your being generous with your time. There is a school of thought in this country that it is important to defeat Saddam Hussein, but not to destroy Iraq. Do you agree with that school of thought, or would you prefer to see Iraq as a country pretty much demolished?
The 2 things is different. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the people of Iraq. These are our friends, and historically we have very good relation. But the most important thing is the who is managing them or who are managing them. And I think the problem is the management of the Iraq. And you can see when President Saddam Hussein came to power in 1979, almost 11 years of his reign, 9 years is with war. In 1980 he started war with Iran. Now in 1990, 10 years later, after 8 years of war, he started another war with Kuwait and turned into a United Nations war against United Nations.
Thank you very much, President Özal, the President of Turkey, who has just succeeded in getting the permission of his parliament for the United States and other allied forces to launch airstrikes against Iraq from inside Turkey. That, at least in theory, frees up the F-111s, not to be confused with the stealth, but the F-111 low-level bombers. These were the aircraft, among others, used on the attack of Libya some years ago. F-111s have been in Turkey, haven't been able to strike into Iraq. Now the Turkish parliament has given its green light. David Martin is at the Pentagon with the late update on casualties from the war. David?
Well, Dan, the news on casualties continues to be good. There are still no further reports of American aircraft losses. That means that the only confirmed loss of a U.S. aircraft is the one F-18 off the aircraft carrier Saratoga. Now, the fact that we've gone through an entire daylight cycle of air operations over in Iraq without losing another aircraft, I think is very significant in that it indicates that U.S. aircraft are able to operate pretty freely at a time of day when aircraft are usually most vulnerable to ground fire. One other indicator is that U.S. aircraft have begun to drop leaflets on the Iraqi positions in Kuwait, calling on them to surrender. Now, that would be the greatest saver of blood imaginable if the Iraqi troops would surrender rather than having to be dug out, every last man, from Kuwait.
David, from everything you've been able to gather, are we likely or unlikely to see a ground assault, a ground offensive within, say, 24 to 36 hours?
I think 24 hours is probably cutting it a little close. I think they've got a lot more work to do. There are so many targets. They are going to have to go back and revisit some of the targets that were on the original hit list for the first phase, simply because the target was obscured by weather or the pilot couldn't lock on to his target. So they've got to go back and get those. And they haven't even started going after the actual equipment, the specific tanks and artillery pieces inside Kuwait, or the ground troops. That is a whole nother bombing campaign, and that hasn't started yet. And I think you would see that before you saw U.S. ground forces committed.
David Martin at the Pentagon with a notation, and when he says there have been very few, if any, attacks against Iraqi ground forces, there were reports of Apache helicopters flown by U.S. pilots moving into Kuwait and attacking some entrenched tank and artillery positions there. But apparently that was on a rather limited scale. We're still trying to sort out the details and the facts on that. Leslie Stahl is at the White House with a report of some growing concern about the possibility of civilian casualties in Iraq. Leslie?
Dan, I think there's satisfaction that there have been few civilian, or at least reported civilian deaths in Iraq so far. The concern, I think, Dan, is more that unless Saddam Hussein surrenders, and I was interested to hear David say that they're trying to get the individual troops to surrender, unless there's surrender, that President Bush may have to order bombings on the military, the Iraqi military forces in Kuwait, and that would be the kind of deaths that I think the United States would begin to worry about in the Arab world. Even if they're soldiers, the president concerned, one would expect, not to have mounting Arab deaths on his hands. The president sent out a plea today through his spokesman and then himself on camera, asking Saddam Hussein to lay down his arms and merely say he's willing to completely withdraw from Kuwait, and that would end the war. Anything short of total commitment to withdraw and a total surrender and a willingness to leave Kuwait. However, the president says he will go forward. The president is working either in the Oval Office or the study right next door. He does not have to make any further decisions. He told us today there will be no pause. He's just going to let the process go forward, which is continued bombing. The only concern, and we heard a little of this from the congressmen when they came out, is that the president would like it to be a short war to prevent mounting Arab deaths, whether they be civilian or whether they be military, Dan.
Thanks, Leslie. And we're noting that while there have been B-52 strikes in Iraq, mostly in the northern half of the country against military targets, the B-52s are always available to begin pounding Iraqi forces in Kuwait. And when one talks about the possibility of really horrendous losses on the Iraqi side, one of the reasons people, and even in the Pentagon, cringe a bit about the use of the B-52s is while they can be a devastating weapon, they are capable of rendering so many casualties in such a short time that it's just horrible to contemplate. Our CBS News coverage of the Persian Gulf War continues.
If your doctor has recommended Metamucil and you like the results, but you don't like those glasses of thick liquid, change to FiberCon. Get the same fiber action in easy-to-swallow tablets. Get doctor-recommended FiberCon.
Roger just can't stop talking about the terrific taste of new Arm & Hammer Dental Care Gel. Right, Roger? Mm-hmm. It has the cool taste of freshly picked mint. Doesn't it, Roger? And it has the baking soda our dentist recommended. We'll never go back to our old gel, will we, Roger? New Arm & Hammer Dental Care Gel or paste from the baking soda experts. Anything else you'd like to add, Roger?
Now at TCBY, you can enjoy the Ultra Slim Fast plan with delicious TCBY non-fat frozen yogurt. What a great tasting way to help you lose weight.
Country's best yogurt, TCBY.
This is the way it has always been. The sun has always blessed the land. And our ways have always passed to caring hands. You'll find the taste of that purity and goodness in every jar of Smucker's preserves and jellies. With a name like Smucker's, it has to be good.
Headlines of the hour from CBS News and its coverage of the war. Stocks take off in the second largest gain ever. Allies continue wave after wave of airstrikes on Iraq and Kuwait. Iraq now claims it has hit 55 planes. The Allies say that's ridiculous. President Bush huddles with his cabinet. The war in the desert has taken Wall Street by storm. Stocks climbed more than 110 points today. That is the second largest gain ever. While stocks soared, oil prices plunged in the biggest one-day drop for oil prices ever. The Exxon Corporation cut its wholesale price by a nickel a gallon. Oil company profits in general are very, very high. Another Allied assault is said to be underway over Iraq and Kuwait. Thunder from the sky continues. Tomahawk missiles such as this one fired from U.S. ships such as the USS Wisconsin, USS Missouri in the Persian Gulf, rocketing off night and day to their targets. Allied forces are reported massing along the Kuwaiti border for what could be a ground offensive. The question is how soon there will be a ground offensive if there is going to be one. Iraq says it's downed 55 Allied planes, but Allied sources say that only 3 planes actually have been lost. That includes one American F-18 Hornet. Its pilot, said to be a Navy pilot, the first and so far only reported U.S. casualty. President Bush is now meeting with his cabinet, first cabinet meeting since the war started. He's called again for Saddam Hussein to surrender. The State Department says it's too late for Saddam to stop the fighting by simply offering to withdraw from Kuwait. President Bush in his cabinet meeting has underscored, we're told time and time again, that the only thing Saddam Hussein can do is get completely out of Kuwait. The White House goes to some length to explain that this is not seen as closing the gates of mercy. It is seen as sending a constant, steady message to Saddam Hussein that the time for talk is over. He either gets out of Kuwait or he's going to continue to get terrible punishment from the air. And as we've mentioned, ground forces led by the U.S. ground forces in Saudi Arabia are maneuvering ever closer to the Kuwaiti border. In our Washington studios now, the former Secretary of Defense during the Reagan administration, Caspar Weinberger. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us as part of our coverage this afternoon. We've heard that the Iraqis have their very best artillery, that long-range Argentinian artillery hidden deep in bunkers. Can sending in B-52s get rid of that artillery threat?
Yes, ordinarily. Their bunkers are probably hardened, but the B-52s carry 2,000-pound bombs, and they carry other armament that would undoubtedly be able to deal with that once the location's pinpointed. And that's part of the strategy, of course, of sending in the first wave of planes that do not bomb. Their mission, of course, is to draw the radar and to draw enemy fire so that the defensive locations can be identified.
I know that you follow these events very closely, minute by minute. In your personal judgment, are we right on the verge now of launching a ground offensive, or would you expect that to be days or even weeks still away?
No, I think it would be some time away. I would agree with David Martin. There's a lot of preliminary work that's necessary on the installations that has to be delivered, the defensive installations that has to be delivered from very low levels. The Apache helicopters and A-10s and various others that are needed to find the location and destroy as many Iraqi tanks as possible, as many defensive installations, as much artillery as possible. And we would want to do that as thoroughly as we could, because the more we can do of that, the more we diminish losses in the ground forces. And that, of course, is something we urgently want to do.
Mr. Secretary, after the Persian Gulf War is over, however long it takes, will it be possible, and if so, how can we make peace with the Iraqi people so we don't face a decade of terrorism?
Well, I think we'll probably find that the Iraqi people, in very large part, are absolutely delighted to be rid of Saddam Hussein. I think that he has ruled by terror and by intimidation and by the most brutal kind of reign. All we see are a few people who are hauled out on the street and required to demonstrate, but there's great hatred for him, which would be natural. They have a miserable standard of living, one of the worst in the world, and I think that we're not going to find it difficult to locate and work with groups in Iraq that are absolutely delighted to be out from under the thumb of this very brutal and arrogant murderer.
Mr. Secretary, last question. You're known as a strategic thinker. Why should someone not believe that once Iraq is defeated, that the Iranians and or the Syrians will prove to be even more trouble to us in the area?
Well, I think that we have that comment being made all the time. I read one of the silliest articles I've ever read this morning, one op-ed page, I've forgotten which paper, in which took the position that the worst thing in the world would be a complete defeat of Saddam Hussein. I think that's nonsense. There will be countries that strive for supremacy in the Mideast. We have always wanted to work with the moderate Arab countries as well as with Israel, and we've wanted to work with them on the basis of maintaining peace in the Mideast. I think we can continue to do that. If you remove one of the most difficult and most dangerous of the brutal aggressors in that area, then I think the task will be easier. The Ayatollah was in the same category, and I don't think anything has really changed in Iran since he left. But if we could get a decent moderate government in Iran as well as in Iraq, we would have removed two of the very difficult areas there. The Saudis could work with a moderate, responsible government in both countries, as could the Kuwaitis and the Jordanians. And I think that would offer more hope for ultimate peace in the Mideast than trying to live with a somewhat chastened or worried Saddam Hussein, who still retained an enormous military capability. I don't think we can have any real peace in that area, nor do I think that our objectives can be limited to just getting him out of Kuwait. We have to leave that country, Iraq, in a situation where they cannot have any war-making potential and can't go back in again and reinvade Kuwait 2 or 3 weeks after we leave.
Former Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, thank you for being with us. Now let's turn to Charles Kuralt, who's been watching and listening to domestic reaction, east, west, north, and south.
Dan, we're doing our best not to frighten people, of course, but war is frightening, and it's reflected in the calls to those 800 numbers the services have set up for families to call in for information. The Army says that it's just being swamped. 10,000 calls an hour coming in on those phone lines. And, of course, they can't answer most of the questions people ask. They want to know which units have been moved forward. My husband's unit, my son's unit, is the kind of question that for security reasons can't be answered, of course. They're not going to give the names of people who are hurt or killed when the time for the hurting and killing really comes. So most of those people are frustrated. And think what it must be to be a school teacher in America today, dealing with children who have no experience of war, many of them frightened, especially in a place like Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where Hetty Kaufman went to school today.
And teachers trying to deal with school children, well, imagine dealing with children of the military. Here around Fort Bragg, 18,000 school students have some connection with the military. Indeed, 12,000 of them have a family member in Saudi Arabia. And it's not just the kids. 600 teachers have a spouse serving in the Gulf. So when the bell rang for classes today, it was not just another day.
There is a shared anxiety at Westover High School, about a mile from Fort Bragg. More than 200 of these students have at least one family member at war. Some have more than that. 15-year-old Christina Edwards fears the war may take every important adult in her life. Her father is deployed in the Gulf. She says her stepmother, an aunt, and an uncle may soon follow.
It was scary, thinking, that I could lose all these people that, that I love and that are real dear to me. You just wanted to cry.
The challenge for counselors and teachers today is to comfort students, while at the same time try to keep them focused on classwork. It led to some compromises: a lecture in the front of the class, television news at the back.
North Carolina officials say they will.
Ironically, the subject of today's history lesson was a pre-dawn attack.
This battle was supposed to be over fairly quickly.
The start of the Civil War. But the eyes of the students showed they were more interested in the pre-dawn attack on Baghdad.
To me, the hardest part about coming to school today was just concentrating on schoolwork.
That's my father's job. That's what he signed up to do. That's what he gets paid to do. And so I understand where he's coming from, and I do worry about him, but I support him 100%.
I am afraid for my father.
I saw everything that was happening there, and it was kind of hard to know that we were going to have to come and face some different views here at how the school takes it.
Counselors roamed the hallways and visited classrooms. Is this a tough day?
I think it's tough for all of us.
What is the most important thing for these kids today?
Today, to know that people care about what they are experiencing, feeling, going through. They must carry on.
Our war coverage continues.
This is a News Channel 5 special report. America at War.
Good afternoon, I'm Bud Hettinger, and here are some of the top local developments pertaining to Operation Desert Storm. A Tennessee National Guard unit from Smyrna is on alert this afternoon. A briefing was held a short time ago at National Guard headquarters here in Nashville. News Channel 5's Vicki Yates was there, and she joins us live now with a report. Vicki.
But Adjutant General Carl Wallace basically just confirmed for us what we first reported about 2 hours ago, that the 568th Personnel Service Company out of Smyrna has been placed on alert. Now, the 568th is basically an accounting faction of the National Guard, counting soldiers and casualties. Now, the alert is for possible activation in Operation Desert Storm, but General Wallace says it's a good chance the detachment will not leave the United States and will possibly be factioned right in Fort Knox, Kentucky for what they're doing. However, he did concentrate on the 134th.
From all indications, they had a front row seat, and some of the stories I'm sure we'll be hearing about later, but they did a good job. They've continued in that role today, and probably from all indications will continue in that role on into the night, and then as long as those strikes last.
Now, the 134th is an air refueling group, or what he calls a flying service station. It provides fuel for any plane, U.S. or its allies, that needs it. And for the first time last night, he said they had the chance to see action up close. He said for them, they called it, quote, a good night. The general has been in touch, he says, and the airstrikes will continue. At this point, he says, however, no new additional units will be activated. And again, but we should mention that Tennessee still has more National Guard units and groups in Saudi Arabia than any other state at this point.
Vicki, before I let you go, let's talk about morale a moment. I guess ours, generally speaking, is pretty good based on the reports we've heard about early action and the success of Operation Desert Storm from our side. But the key question today really is, how is morale holding up among our fighting men and women from Middle Tennessee and Southern Kentucky?
Well, but General Wallace says he has been in touch with these people just as recently as mid-morning, and he says it is going up. He says morale is high. They are aware of what's going on in the Middle East while they're there. They say that they know things are going on. They feel successful. Morale is just taking a tumble on up.
All right, thank you. Vicki Yates at the National Guard headquarters here in Nashville. Well, security, as you might imagine, is tight today at the home of the 101st Airborne. Bomb-sniffing dogs and military police are checking traffic in and out of the Fort Campbell base very carefully, guarding against possible terrorist attacks. And for the latest word from Fort Campbell, we join News Channel 5's Scott Couch for a live report. Scott?
Good afternoon, Bud. One of the biggest ways that security around the Fort Campbell area is being tightened from a visible standpoint is the gates. There are 6 gates that the public can enter Fort Campbell from, the soldiers as well. Of those, only 2 are now open. There are 2 reasons for that. First of all, security, and another reason is because 19,000 people who used to call Fort Campbell home are now in the Middle East. The Department of the Army, I'm told, Bud, has 4 levels of security at not only this Army base, but at Army bases all across the country. Earlier this afternoon, at orders from the Department of the Army, it was stepped up to the 2nd level, the Bravo level. Army officials were reluctant to confirm exactly what that meant, but we have some videotape that we'd like to show you now that will at least in part give you some idea of what the Bravo level of security means here at Fort Campbell. Drug and bomb-sniffing dogs are being used around the gate areas to try to alleviate any possible chance that a bomb would be slipped in for some sort of terrorist activity. Fort Campbell is one of the biggest Army bases in all the nation, 105 acres, and because of that, obviously they've got a very large surface area to protect. We understand that new fences are also being put up around areas that heretofore were not protected. But everything is on full alert here at Fort Campbell, Bud.
Things seem pretty secure on this side, but what can you tell us about activity of the 101st Airborne in Operation Desert Storm or plans for their involvement?
Well, at this point, Army officials here at the base continue to say that they have received no word from either Defense Secretary Cheney or Colin Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that the 101st Airborne has been involved in any activity in the Persian Gulf. However, they do say that they do anticipate the 101st being involved in the days ahead, but as far as for a timetable, they really don't know, Bud.
Scott Couch live at Fort Campbell. Thank you. And we'll bring you more news in just a moment.
Oh, sorry.
Want to hear the last of your cough? Then get the safe, soothing, natural relief of Creamulsion and turn a bad cough off.
The same people who've won 18 gold medals for all they've put into Cracker Barrel cheddar now take something out. Cracker Barrel Light. 1/3 less fat than cheddar. Taste and judge for yourself.
Affordable Dentures Cookeville, PC. Dr. Dan Hips.
The constant discomfort your old dentures are causing you may result from natural changes in your gum and oral bone structure. Replacing those old, ill-fitting dentures is now affordable with Affordable Dentures. No appointments necessary, yet we offer same-day service within our office by 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Affordable Dentures Cookeville, PC. Call us toll-free.
Anti-war protesters in East Tennessee are taking their disgust to a new extreme. A Tennessee guardsman's wife in Elizabethton says protesters are harassing her at home. Ernestine Hicks says she's received 9 calls since the attack began. She believes protesters should be escorted out of the U.S. Well, generally, war protesters band together for support, and so do families of large groups like the 101st and the National Guard. But now a support group is forming in Middle Tennessee for all the families whose loved ones in Operation Desert Storm are not part of a unit based in this area and who feel isolated with no one to share their heartache. Starting next week, there will be a hotline staffed by ministers, psychologists, and military families. We will let you know when that hotline starts operating. And that's our news at this hour. We invite you to stay tuned to News Channel 5 for the very latest local developments on the war in the Persian Gulf anytime at all that the situation might warrant. Right now, though, we will send you back to the CBS network for more of the continuing coverage of Operation Desert Storm.
You are watching CBS News' continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
The air war thunders on, apparently highly successful. Question, how soon a ground offensive? No answer forthcoming. President Bush has told Saddam Hussein again today, surrender unconditionally. The United States threatens escalation if Iraq uses chemical weapons. Ground troops massing near the Kuwaiti border, but no actual signs of an Allied move into Kuwait. A lot of speculation, many questions, but no actual sign of movement into Kuwait on the ground yet. Reported tolls. Allies say 3 planes lost. Iraq claims 55 planes have been downed. The Allied air attacks go on by warplane and by cruise missiles. At the United Nations, U.S. Ambassador Pickering warned Iraq not to use what he called weapons of mass destruction, saying that it would bring a dramatic escalation in hostilities. He's talking about the possibility of chemical and biological weapons being used yet by Iraq. U.S. and Allied warplanes show no let-up in a relentless air war against Iraq. President Bush says there isn't going to be any pause. Well over 1,200 air sorties have been flown, as well as more than 100 cruise missiles launched. British Prime Minister